Guys, I'm back, and today we're going to talk about calf training. Now, I don't claim to have the biggest calves in the world, but one thing I can tell you is that they've improved, and they've improved dramatically since the first day that I started training them. Have I had periods where they've not responded? Yes. But them not responding was down to what I wasn't doing. And so over the years, I've done all the different methodologies of training, I've looked at all the different styles and exercises available, but it still comes down to that number one thing, execution. It still comes down to getting the exercises right. So in many of my videos, I talk about extremity execution. When we talk about chest, we talk about being able to recruit the chest muscles from the extremities and getting the muscles lengthened and shortened. However, you go into any gym around the country, or world for that matter, and you still see people training their calves in a completely different fashion to how they train every other muscle group. There still needs to be the same detail. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you through the soleus training and the gastrocnemius training. So we're going to use the standing calf raise and we're going to look at the seated calf raise. Now, calf training doesn't have the luxury of many types of different equipment. Why? Because the muscle and its actions and its function is there's very minimal ways that you can actually stimulate the calves. However, there are a lot of different ways that you can challenge the calves to ensure that they grow and ensure their development. So, I'm going to move across now to the seated calf, and we're going to take you through exactly the full execution and all the variabilities to how to make them bigger. So guys, I'm at the seated calf raise, and in fairness, this is one of the best seated calf raises I've actually used. It's the Watson Strength seated calf raise. Why is it so good? Well, one of the reasons it's so good is it actually has a curve to the foot pad. What that allows me to do is to actually roll over a lot more effectively than it does do if there's a flat pad. Very few people have the ability to come right up onto their toes, and what we're trying to get with any form of calf training is this plantar flexion, so this pointing of the ankle, and that plantar flexion allows you to get the calf fully shortened. So with a lot of people not necessarily being weak, but actually having some level of mobility issues in your toe flexors can be a big issue. We'll get into that in a second. But when it comes to soleus training, unlike the gastroc, which actually attaches onto the femur, the soleus, this muscle at the bottom, doesn't attach onto the femur. So we can actually get more stimulation of this lower muscle by being in a seated position. Now the second thing is, the soleus sits underneath the gastroc. So the bigger you can get the soleus, you're also going to get a push out and get some fullness and density to the lower part of the leg. And if you want the development of both, you need to train the gastroc and the soleus equally. So when you're going to look at the technique of this, let's go back to this extremity execution. So we've got plantar flexion, and we've got dorsiflexion. So when you want to get the calf fully lengthened, we need fully dorsiflexion. And then to get the calf fully shortened, we need to get full plantar flexion. They're the two primary things you need to consider. A lot of people will talk about moving your foot placement all over the place to challenge the calf in different places. Well, the calf muscles attach down into the Achilles and down onto the calcaneus. So realistically, when you start moving the ankle joint around, you're creating a lot of instability. And to train the gastroc uniformly, you need to get into the habit of training in a sagittal plane, up and down. So don't try and confuse yourself with trying to go too wide or too narrow and changing all the foot placements around. Trust me, I've tried every single one of those variations and they're ineffective at calf development. The thing you need to learn is how to plantar flex in a straight line without getting any deviation of the ankle, straight down and straight up, to get maximal development and balance through the soleus muscle. Most people cannot get right up onto the toe. So what I'm going to show you with this one is exactly what we're looking for from the machine. So we're going to get a full dorsiflexion and then a full plantar flexion. Is that it? No, not at all. We've only just started. So you need to think, first and foremost, am I in control of the muscle? So from this position here, most people drop and then throw it up. You're not in control of the full spectrum of the muscle fibers. So what we're going to do is going to go down from the bottom, and what I always teach is, can you consciously drive the heels up whilst fully contracting the calf muscles, the gastrocs? From this bottom position here, most people have to get a little bounce to get out of it. Why? Because at the extremities, if you have to bounce at all, that is where you're weak. If you have to get up to the top by leaning back and throwing the weight up, you're weak. And I've always said this in my videos, where you're weak is your biggest opportunity to develop. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the heels down, and then consciously, you see this, consciously bringing the heels up, not thinking about pushing the toes forward. We're going to consciously think about squeezing, bringing the heels up as high and as high and as high as possible. Now this might be the point where you're able to get to. Therefore that might indicate that the load is too heavy for you. So if you can get to the bottom and get the stretch, and you can only get to here, you're not getting the gastroc fully shortened. So we need to take the fully lengthened range and achieve the fully shortened range. So if you're loading up 2 or 3 plates as a beginner, you're only able to get to here. You're missing this opportunity to grow up, 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 up. So right now, the most basics of what I've just taught you is going to give you months of development, because you're going to have to drop the weight to get stronger and to get bigger. So we go down to the bottom, we've got the extremity execution, so we think about contracting, we're going to drive the heels up, and at this point here you'll think that's it. It's not. Watch. Up. So you're going to go under control, extremity, up, 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 up. Now at that point, most people are going to start shaking. Most people are going to start cramping. And if you're in the gym and there's only 10 kilos on there, forget your ego, leave your ego at the door. It's your calf muscles you're trying to grow, nobody else's. So phase 1 with the Soleus training is to learn how to take yourself down to the bottom, no bouncing, contract the soleus, squeeze the heels up, and the whole squeezing part of this in the early foundations training is essential, because it means you're in control of the muscle. You can't put speed of a movement through an exercise until you've learned how to contract the muscles from the extremities through, and then we can start adding load and moving through the process. So I'm just going to go through this one more final time. To execute the seated calf, under control, you take the load to the weight to the bottom, you contract the calves out of the bottom, you contract, no bouncing, and then you squeeze up, 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 up. At that top point, there's going to be cramping for most people, there's going to be pain, there's going to be burning, but you are going to grow where you're weak. And then without dropping, you keep it under control, stretch, 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 and then we're up. At that point, when you've got good at the control and training through the full range of movement, learn how to pause for 2 seconds at the top, learn how to pause for 2 seconds at the bottom. They're the first phases of executing the Soleus exercise on a seated calf raise, and I guarantee they're going to grow. Now, throughout this video, not only am I going to teach you the exercise execution side of it, same thing with the gastroc, I'm then going to talk to you about strategies that you can use progressively over time. Right guys, the second exercise I'm going to talk you through. Standing calf raise. There are very, very few gyms that don't have the standing calf raise. Now like I said, you do need to balance your calf training between Soleus training, seated training and standing versions. Most people don't, okay? Now, go into any gym, just like the Soleus training, and watch people bouncing up and down all day long, and their calves look like they've never, ever, ever been under load. Now, this is an exercise. Just because there's a full stack of weights there doesn't mean that your goal within the first 2 weeks is to move it, because it doesn't matter how much load you move. If you're not under control, if you're not able to contract through the full range of movement, then you're not going to get optimal development, whether it's biceps, triceps, quads, hamstrings, you name it. I've talked about this at length in my videos. Execution is key before you make any level of progress in strength. So I put the weight on pretty low. Why am I holding this? Well, over the years, I've come across many people who have a big problem with getting up onto their big toe. Now that's due to ligament injuries in ankles. I have a lot of instability in my ankle, just because I'm very mobile. So what you'll find with a lot of people is that I'm going to ask Gus to just pan down and look at my feet for a second. What happens with a lot of people is as they come up, they have a lot of instability in their ankles and they just drop over. Now at this point here, you're not actually getting any height to or shortening to the calves. You're just rolling your ankle over. And that's minimizing the balance of the muscle that you're going to get. So what we had was Michael Gordon actually very kindly gave this to us from RTS and Integra. And what this little dome does, just like the Watson's seated calf raise, this actually allows us to fully plantar flex. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to have this, but if you have a problem getting up onto your big toe, don't worry about it. You can adapt it with like a half dome shape, which will allow you to get right up onto your big toe. I'm going to show you how I use it, then I'm going to go back and actually show you how I use it without it. So when it comes to calf training, remember extremity execution, control, full range of movement, lengthen and shorten range. Learn how to get there. Learn how to analyze where you're weak. And where you're weak, you're going to cramp, you're going to shake, it's going to be painful. But that's your biggest opportunity to grow. So we're going to get in. Okay, so what do we have there? We'll take this off for a second. First and foremost, I was going down in a straight line, so I wasn't kicking back. Second of all, I had a straight leg. Now, because the gastroc muscle attaches laterally and medially to the femur, the minute you bend the knee, as a lot of people say you should do, you're actually going to get a shortening. Okay, so from here, what we want in this bottom stretch position is a full lengthening of the calf. The minute you bend the knee, it's doing the complete opposite and the muscle isn't getting under full stretch. So as you go down, if you bend, you're minimizing the length that you're going to get from the calf and minimizing ultimately the shortening that you're going to get from the calf. So don't consciously think about bending the knee joint when you're coming up and coming down. That should remain straight. There should be no pushing back and hyperextending of the knees. So I'll go back in here again and I'm just going to show you on the platform flat. So like I said, you're keeping a very straight line, you're getting maximal lengthening of the gastroc, and then you're going to get maximal shortening at the top. The complexity of the exercise execution is actually not that difficult, not as difficult as when it comes to things like retracting and depressing for the lat muscles, or trying to keep the scapula stable for any chest movements, because you're going in an up and down movement. However, what you always see is this: bending back, bending the knees, bouncing. So these things are going to impair your ability to grow. So remember, whether it's soleus training or gastroc training, take yourself down to the bottom, hold the position for 2 seconds to start with, make sure you initiate. So make sure, just like you do with any other muscle group, you squeeze the contraction from the stretch position and you squeeze all the way through to peak contraction. So right at the top of the movement. Hold that position for 2 seconds. Yes, it's going to be painful, but the weight you select is going to be based upon your ability to go fully lengthened and fully shortened. Are there tips and tricks you can use for calf training? 100%. I'm going to go through them all in a second. But you must make sure that execution's right on both exercises. Right guys, here's the nuggets that you've been waiting for. How do I create some variety to my calf training? Well, let me tell you this. You could use the tips I've just given you for Soleus training and gastroc training for the next 2 months of contracting out of the bottom, contracting all the way through and reaching that fully shortened position and continue to grow and continue to develop. Why? You're going to have to drop your load considerably because the places upon each lift that you're weak are the biggest opportunities to grow. You don't need to increase your calories, you don't need to increase anything, you just need to train them properly. But when it comes down to training, what are you missing out on? Well, the calves get used, we all know, day in, day out, day in, day out. Walking on your body weight. So they're used to good load. They're used to frequency. So when you're training your calves once a week, that's not going to get them to grow. So my advice to anybody that wants to develop their calves is you need to be training them at least 3 times a week. Now I employ what's called a tag-on approach to training body parts. But when it comes to calf training, normally when it's a weakness for most people, they need to be trained at the beginning of a workout. Why? Because you'll give it 110%. If you don't give it 110% and you give it 50% at the end of the workout, they're going to be very, very slow to respond because you're not going to give it everything. Calves respond to high volume. Calves respond to a lot of cell swelling and lactic acid production. Therefore, you're going to have to get used to some pain. They also respond very, very well to variety and different loading parameters. So high repetitions, low repetitions, but we've got to make sure that you're getting at least 100 reps per set or per workout with calves. Now that's quite a lot, but you can get that in drop sets, rest pause sets, whether you're using cluster style sets, and I'll explain those in a second. First thing you need to do when you train calves is you need to get used to the pause technique. So that's pausing 2 seconds at the bottom, 2 seconds at the top, and go for a minimum of 15 reps per set. Now if you're going to do a minimum of 15 reps per set, do 5 sets for Soleus training and 5 sets for gastroc training. Rest time for calves, optimally between 45 and 70 seconds to start with until we get into doing some drop sets. Do those at the beginning of your workout, so you can do gastroc on a Monday, Soleus on a Wednesday, and gastroc on a Friday. The next week you can do Soleus on a Monday, gastroc on a Wednesday, and Soleus on a Friday. Or, alternatively, you could train them 3 days in a row, take a rest day off, 3 days in a row. But with doing that, you could do less sets. So 3 sets for gastroc, 3 sets for Soleus on a Monday, Wednesday, and a Friday. But make sure you're doing collectively more volume over time. You could actually go gastroc, Soleus, gastroc, rest, gastroc, Soleus, gastroc, rest. So you can see that you can get quite a lot of frequency in there, especially when you're weak. They're going to recover very, very quickly. When I put my calf training through some real damage, they do take 2 or 3 days to recover. So I know when I've had a good workout, when I've really stimulated them a hell of a great deal. Techniques that are very, 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 very helpful. Pausing at the extremities, like I said. So working through the 2 second pauses, 3 second pauses. The other thing that you can do is you can focus on the shortened range. So I'm going to ask Gus to point down a second. This is the fully shortened range of the calf. So what I will do at the beginning of a workout is I'll use a lighter weight and come up onto my toe for the first 2 or 3 sets, as high as I possibly can. And then at the end of the set, so I do 3 sets in the fully shortened range, but then because I'm going to be stronger in this more stretched range here at the bottom, I can actually increase the load and train where I'm stronger for the next 3 sets. So you can do fully shortened range, concentrating with a lighter weight because you're going to be weaker there, and then extend the sets, so do 3 more sets, but train heavier out of that bottom position. Works great for seated, works great for standing. Then you can add in drop sets. Drop sets is where you're actually going to use a load for 12 to 15 repetitions, and then you're going to take a percentage, 20% of the weight off, 15% of the weight off, try and get as many reps as you can out. Same thing again with the weight, try and get as many reps out if you can with the drop in load, and then go again. So you do 3 drop sets. What I would tend to do is 3 straight sets, so without any drop sets, and then the last 3 sets, do those with triple drop sets. Works very well. So that's kind of like a lot more higher repetition stuff. The other thing you can do is cluster sets. Now cluster sets allows you to use a heavy load, but get a lot of work done. So let's say, for example, you can do the seated calf with this 20 kg plate on there for 12 to 15 reps. What you could do is add another plate on and get 8 repetitions, pause for 15 seconds, try and get 3 out with it, pause for 15 seconds, try and get 3 out with it, pause for 15 seconds, try and get 3 out. So you've got, on top of that initial 8 reps, another 9 or 10 repetitions on top, but you've been able to move 40 kilos across that time frame instead of using 20 for 12 to 15 reps. Works very, very well. So you've got drop sets, you've got cluster sets, 2 phenomenal ways of being able to make the process extended. Then you can use in themselves a methodology where you go for a set number of reps. Like I said, 100 repetitions. So you could get on, put 20 kilos on there, and try and do as 100 repetitions in as few sets as possible. And every time you come back to do that, say once a week maximum, you try and hit the whole 100 repetitions in as few sets as possible. Now, that's a snippet, guys, of all the variations and methodologies you can do to train and the variety to stimulate the calves. So remember, heavy loading, light loading, high repetitions, low repetitions. What I also like to do is have a week where I focus on very high reps with a load that I can move for the higher reps, and then a week where I focus on more heavy loading and do cluster sets, etc., and try and shift a lot more weight on the calves. Remember, they respond to a lot of variety, a lot of different stimulus. Exercises have to stay similarly the same, so use all the variables that I've given you. Guys, in the next 2 to 3 months, if your calves haven't grown, then you've got to send me a message and say, what the hell's up? Put 100% into it like you do every other muscle group. Make sure you stay consistent. Make sure you add variety. But above all things, make sure in the first couple of weeks you get execution nailed down from the length and range to the short and range. Extremity execution is key. Good luck, guys.